I don't want to go the risk, be the benefit, as high as it may be. What is behind that? What is your experience? Why are humans risk averse in general, not just in this little task? So if anyone has an idea, please speak up. The experience, of course, is that here in MS Teams meetings, we don't know each other too well, so there's typically a little shyness. Maybe this risk is perceived too high too. I don't know. So
if I may, I have my hands raised. May I?
Yeah, sure.
Sure. So I think it has to do with the fear of the unknown in general. As humans, we don't like darkness. We don't like what we don't know, and the risk is an unknown. It's an unknown factor. Whether it's high or low, still we don't want to go into something we don't know, unless we know, of course, all the features of whatever experiment we're going into. But yeah, out of my experience, I think maybe that's one reason.
Great, wonderful, totally true. Someone else?
Yeah, hello everyone. Yeah, I just want to comment that the decision on the first question and the second one is really depends on the organization you are working in, because if the atmosphere in the organization is,
excuse me, the organization comes in 2 or 3 minutes. Let's first go to the individual. Just why are individuals as such humans risk averse? Go on, please.
Dimitri, please share with us what you were about to say.
No, it was about the atmosphere and the organization that you're working in, and these questions and the answers might depend on what is around you and how others are feeling about risk positive and other things.
Mm-hmm. Right. And we come to that a little later. I also read here in the chat, get more profit. It is a part of entrepreneurial nature to risk, to lose something to get more. Yeah, right. But why do people refrain from going this way? Well, I've made my mind up as well on this issue, and try to provide you now with some thoughts and some research on that aspect here too. So the research says, well, we already touched this. There is something that is termed loss aversion in the general research literature. It means that a loss weighs much stronger than the same amount of money, for example, as a profit. So we have a distorted balance against losses. This has evolutionary roots. So when we were basically living in caves some 100,000 years ago, and there was an unknown thing, something that could be maybe a dangerous animal, maybe some predator or so, or just nothing. It has paid being risk averse. So the one who just was curious, what was this sound? Maybe it's a friend, or maybe it's nothing. Let's just have a look. They tended to be killed by the lion if there was one. So there are strong evolutionary roots that makes us cautious if there is something unknown, if there is a risk, if there is something unfamiliar. And we as modern humans, well, modern times are just very, very short in relationship to the long history of human beings, and still this is a very strong effect. There has been a Nobel Prize award, and then who described this pattern. There's a theory on that. It's called prospect theory. It teaches us interesting lessons on the risk behavior of people. So in this short teaser presentation, we do not dive deeper in that. We rather look what the top managers would do. So here we have a portfolio of 20 projects. And let's just assume for a second, I did not introduce that in the presentation so far, but let's assume that these projects are all unrelated, so that also the risks are unrelated. If we have cumulative effects and the risk of interactions, it may be a slightly different thing. But let's assume that these projects are independent, so that this can balance. Then we have not just one alternative, we have a set, we have a portfolio of projects. And if we look at the extremes first, then 20 projects of type A would of course mean 20 times 200, 4 million euros. And the risk is 0. It becomes more interesting if we look at project type B, because there, first of all, we have 20 times the benefit. Again, almost twice as high. But what about the risk? I assume that the project risks are unrelated. So this means that it's a matter of calculation. Most failures will balance out. Right? Simply pretty unlikely that we have 20 projects that all will fail. It's possible, but it's not likely. We can calculate that and first have a look at the risk that 20 projects type A projects make less profit than 20 projects of type B, which is the alternative. And the risk is very low. See here, it is by far not even 1%. In fact, only in 2,000 cases, there will be one where the profit of 20 projects of type B is lower than the profit of projects type A. So this really sounds doable or bearable. It's not a 20% risk any longer. It's just 0.05%, which is, well, more or less just nothing. If we look at the risk that 20 projects of type A generate a loss, so collectively do not generate any profit, the risk is of course lower. In fact, we need a number of zeros in order to model that. Here it is 0.00000008%. So we can say this is almost impossible. It's not literally impossible, but it's almost impossible. So in fact, this portfolio effect levels out the risk. So from a company perspective, it would be very, very good if the employees would collectively choose project type B. The risk is 0 and the profits are just twice as high, almost twice as high. So let's see what you think, what the managers in your company, the 20 most important managers in your companies would have done. So I'm curious too regarding the results. Here they are. Oops. 62 would go the safe way. Okay, which is kind of an extreme solution. Recall that this is the choice that collectively, from a company perspective, is clearly inferior to the choice of project B. So from a company perspective, this is a pure catastrophe if you're right. It just indicates that the company does not make use of this portfolio effect, which is unfortunate. For the individual, it might be something different, 1 out of 5, but here the risk is just nothing. So again, the question, why are humans risk averse? And now I invite you also to consider this company perspective. We already had touched it. One of the participants mentioned that in companies or in organizations, failures are not necessarily very much rewarded and welcome. Maybe someone has an additional insight or confirms that perspective and wants to express his or her perspective on that. Looking whether some...
Would anyone like to add some inputs from the organization approach to risk aversion?
This is Ioana Mihai. I guess in case of organization, the projects are evaluated on individual basis. They have individual KPIs, and there is a clear responsibility. It's not a collective one, so people may refrain from taking risks rather than being on an individual basis.
Right. This is when I talk to managers, this is what I often hear. Well, success is hardly rewarded, but failure, if something goes wrong, well, you have lost your friends. Failure is punished. Failure does result in getting no bonus, getting no advancement, in wrecked careers, sometimes even in losing the job. And of course, one also carries their reputation of being a loser as long as one lives within the organization. So this is typically something that is added from an organization perspective, which is kind of interesting because from the organization perspective, it would be very wise to encourage people to accept certain levels of risk, not blindly, of course, but if the benefits outweigh the risk. But it's not done. Quite the opposite. Typically, there are clear incentives against taking risks. So, the million-dollar question, what can be done on that? We focus first on the individual perspective. What can be done is, the first thing is to recognize the problem, to be aware of this bias against risks. Loss aversion, if people know that something like that exists and calculate the odds, in many times the effect goes away. So I don't know if you ever experienced when you, for example, rented a ski. Usual question, or rented a car. The typical question from the renter is, would you like a coverage, an insurance? It just costs you, in case of skis, I don't know, if you rent it for 3 days, it costs you 20 euros. And in case of a rented car, it also is not so expensive. And many people do not reflect on the situation and say, yes, okay, because they want to avoid the risk by all means. And if you ask me, I never take this option, at least not if I have to pay it myself. So because, well, the insurance wants to earn money, and it will be a deal that has an expected negative value for me. unless I know that I'm a super risky driver or case of skiing and car driving. But if I'm corresponding to the average, it's a loss game. I will lose money. And at the same time, the loss situation will not ruin me. If the skis actually will be stolen or I wreck them, well, it costs me a couple of $100, which is, well, not a nice thing, but it doesn't ruin me. So for my entire life, I saved, I don't know how many, how much money for these insurances I did not take. So recognizing the problem is certainly the first thing. Then, of course, entrepreneurial training, being together with people who have a similar approach towards risks and chances helps being more relaxed about risks. Sometimes risks strike, that's for sure. But in most times, we're not killed and we still live. Well, or if not, well, accept consequences. Who doesn't want to go for risks can. There are some niches for people where risks do not play a major role. Certainly, this is not the MBA for entrepreneurship and innovation, and it's not starting a company, and it's not innovation-related jobs, because they are related, inevitably related to risk. What about the organization perspective? A clear indicator is that in companies in which we have the effects as we saw, something should be done regarding incentives. Obviously, they increase the human tendency of becoming too cautious by further inducing negative consequences. So as we saw, it should be quite opposite. So when I talk, for example, to a manager of a company that I had analyzed, which was remarkably innovative, and where the number of innovations they came up with was super impressive. I asked the CEO how he achieves that. What is his secret sauce? And he answered me, well, I have introduced in my company a system that in every yearly conversation I have with my subordinate, I want to learn about 3 projects that went wrong, that went down the alley. Because only then, and of course I don't like failures as well, but only if people risk failure, they will come up with great and innovative projects. And he had installed this system throughout the entire company, meaning it was something that was built in the DNA of this organization. And this, in a way, is already the second point. He established an entrepreneurial culture, some culture where failure is possible. Of course, not stupid failure. Well, slapping the customer in his face probably is a stupid mistake. But trying a product or a business model that is different than what we had for many years is not necessarily a stupid mistake, even if it turns out it doesn't work. So what is important is to have established an atmosphere, a culture in which this is possible, in which people dare to go the risky way in case the chances outweigh the risks. So, and the final thing is what follows from this huge delta. We saw that all you guys were, let's say, quite rational and bold risk takers, entrepreneurial types. 89% versus 11%, and your organizations did not mirror this behavior or this attitude. So that was rather the opposite. So what follows from this? From my perspective, it's two things. It is, you can lead the change in your organization. You can work on making this organization better, more risk embracing, more positive, a better failure culture, leading the change there. Or if this does not work, if you know, well, it simply will not work. They will not let me. It's not possible here. Then think about quitting, going to somewhere else where they have a more rational and more forward-looking and more bold attitude toward risk, or start your own business, which is, times are now better than they have ever been. And in both cases, you might consider attending or applying for the MBA on entrepreneurship innovation, because that's what we do. We teach there how to make organizations, companies more innovative, or how, if you wish, how you can start your own company. That's what I had for today. It was a pleasure chatting with you, and I'm looking forward to getting questions and letting Ms. Pedersen take over the lead role, I think, now in moderating our general discussion.
And I'm happy to do that. Thank you very much, first of all, for this great presentation with the interactive features. And we have our first question coming in. Jude is wondering if can risks be managed in an organization with a severity, probability, and detectability matrix? Would this help as a tool to manage risks in an organization?
Well, these are tools that help for risks we know. The problem in many cases is that there are unknown risks as well. So the uncertainties, and for them it's pretty hard to manage them with quantitative approaches. There we need different approaches. So I would say that as an answer, partly yes, but it's a little bit more complex than that.
Okay. All right. Well, Jude, let us know if you have a follow-up question or another question on your mind. And we'd like to invite you all now to ask your questions as well, or perhaps give us some feedback. And I had a question, Professor Franke. You mentioned that entrepreneurial training is basically one way to become less risk averse, and become more risk friendly. Do you think that perhaps getting out of your comfort zone is one way to do that, and perhaps by traveling or so?
Well, traveling can play a role, particularly if we think about our field trips. We often observed that when we had our field trips to the US, where the class spends some time and just meets typical entrepreneurs from the US. This year we had the plans, before we had COVID, to go to Silicon Valley, and this will also be the destination for our next field trip. And experiencing this can-do mentality and this spirit of experimentation and trying out is really very inspiring. So the impression is that role models and let's say getting used to or socialization plays a major role. So if we are confronted with many people in our surroundings who are all have a strong fear before a risk, this has an effect on us, and also vice versa. So if we see, well, there are people who just tried out. Yeah, what the hell does happen? It's not the end of the world. This clearly makes a difference. And this is something we experience typically in the course of the MBA, not just in the future, but also after a while in the class, because these guys are like-minded.
Okay, so probably changing the group you're hanging out with or professionally associated with might be a way to become a little more innovative and risk-friendly. And thanks for answering that. We also had a question in from Fadi, who is wondering basically if you're already at an organization, what would be some of the key performance indicators or ways of measuring whether or not a department is innovative? How do you measure that? Is there a specific metric that you could suggest?
Well, there are a couple of approaches, and one very easy thing would be to try out the little task we had here now together with promised anonymity and see what the outcome is. And I once did such an exercise, and it was very, very funny because the CEO attended it was a group of top managers, including the CEO and the C-level board. And I asked beforehand what the C managers, what they think the outcome would be. And they said, well, something like 50-50 or so. And the result was 100% going the secure way. And you can believe me, this was a real shock for the CEO and his board, because he never expected that it would be so extreme. And it took us a whole afternoon discussing the reasons for that, and the results pretty much mirrored what we had in our little discussion here. The organization punished failure far more than they rewarded success. So success, one manager, it was a very open discussion. One manager then said, well, it doesn't matter if you have a success of 100,000 or 200,000. This doesn't matter. People say, well done. That's very nice. Well done. But beware of a failure. You can never get this off your track record. So the question was, how can we measure? Well, this is what I suggest, or we can talk about more sophisticated tools, but this is then already part of the MBA, I'm afraid.
Okay, and I mean, to take a step back, the question was also addressed as, I mean, what is defined as innovation? Is it just an automation? Is automation of a process innovation? Is digitalization of a process, is that innovation per se, or is there a better description of innovation in your terms?
There are tons of definitions, and I don't care too much for definitions because, well, they don't lead too much to something. But one thing is important: innovation has many faces, and many people just think about technological developments. This is clearly one part of innovation, but not necessarily the only one, and not even necessarily the most important one. Very important also service innovations, process innovations, business model innovations, and very often it is not a completely new development. It is rather a clever and new combination. Schumpeter termed innovation new combinations. And that is often overlooked also by politics, who kind of have the tendency to say, well, innovation, you mean technology, new technology, right? And I'm afraid that this is only part of the whole thing. So innovation is something very fundamental, and it covers many aspects.
Okay, I mean, yeah, it seems like there are quite a few methods then for innovation. When you mentioned it can be a business plan innovation or even a service innovation. So I guess you go into further detail in your core sources of innovation.
Yep.
But we are moving on, and we have a further question that relates back to Project B's risk level. And she was wondering if it's possible to limit the known risk of Project B, or in potential situations, how would you be able to limit known risks and perhaps go about lowering or getting to know the risks? I think that's the question, if I understand it correct.
Well, of course, nobody likes risks, and if it is possible to conduct a project in a more professional way with sophisticated analysis, etc., lowering the risk is always, of course, a good idea. The question is just interesting if it goes at the expense of the profit. Then it becomes a trade-off situation, and this is what we have looked at. But of course, the risk as such is something negative, to be totally clear about that. And when I talk to entrepreneurs, also very successful entrepreneurs, about risks, they always say they hate risks. They hate risks. Risk is awful. Risk is negative. Risk means danger and means loss. But they accept risks if there is a rational calculus that tells us, well, the benefits outweigh the risks by far. Then they say, well, okay, well, there's a risk. Yeah, well, okay, but chances are higher. And that's how we should perceive risks, as something negative, as something that if it is possible to avoid them, avoid it. But if there is a trade-off between benefits or profits and risk, sometimes choose the more risky option. But not
there
as
seems
a,
to also
not
be
as a in itself, as a goal in itself. Risk is negative.
There seems also to be a sort of a trade-off between stability and risk-free, or taking on a risk and having a little bit more freedom, in a sense. So it's also a choice there of what way to lead.
Right.
Yes. And all right. Well, great questions. Keep them coming, dear audience members. This is your evening to ask Professor Franke your questions that you might have had on innovation and innovative topics that might have been going through your mind now that you've been back home from work. But we had another question coming in as that relates to the residencies. And you mentioned that the class residency is planned to go to the Silicon Valley, and Yusuf is asking if the decision to go to the United States is basically why was the decision there? I mean, if the business environment is a little bit different, and considering the mindset of Europeans and the United States, what's the justification of going to the United States?
Well, the reason is that it's pretty interesting and inspiring to see how people and how companies organize for innovation, what the mindset is, what the organizational tools are, how what their experiences are. So the general experience is that most participants who had not the privilege of having visited Silicon Valley and the top companies, tech companies so far, they have a twofold perspective. On the one hand, they say, well, they're also just, well, they cannot fly, they cannot walk over the water. It's human still. But on the other hand, it's pretty inspiring how they approach a problem, how they approach an opportunity, how they view their career and their business, how free they are and how playful they are. And for many, it is very well, it's a mind-changing experience for particularly for those who didn't have the opportunity to go there yet. And I must say that I enjoy being in these areas all the time, because it's just a kind of an energy boost it gives to us. So that's
Definitely,
the reason
yeah.
that the classes typically in the past have enjoyed these trips very much. It's also a collective thing, and it's much fun, and there's an opportunity of well, experiencing the group of students and being together. So that's fun.
And I guess you do make a lot of cool new friendships during the MBA as well on such trips abroad, when you're wining and dining in the evenings after classes and company visits.
Yeah,
but,
sure.
But still, great question. Yeah.
That's a very important point in general regarding the MBA. Many students underestimate the effect of being in an environment where strong, like-minded people come together, and there is no rivalry. Because most managers, well, are aware of, if they face a problem and they ask a colleague, chances are that this colleague says, well, aha, now I know what the weak part of this guy is. And well, similarly, you would possibly not necessarily approach your superior with something where you think you have a weakness or don't know what to do. And the experience of having a strong group who work together for a long time, for 2 years almost, is very enriching. And these are strong guys. And what we experienced a couple of times is that people helped each other with problems also unrelated to the content of the MBA, just because they felt as a community, as someone helping the other. And helping the other doesn't go at the expense of me, so it's not a zero-sum game. It is something that is just the norm in the group. So what we have is typically a very strong sense of community. And if I talk to alumni, as a difference to what I said in the beginning, if I talk to students in the beginning, the alumni report that a big part of the benefit they obtained from the MBA program actually came from their fellow students. And it's about problem solving, it's about projects they did together. Some started companies together. In some cases, someone said, well, I know you now well enough. We have an open position here in my department. Why don't you send me your CV and I try to settle things, and you start here. We would need you here. So
yeah, and that actually
very, very live.
That definitely relates to another question we had coming in from Regina. She was namely wondering, if you're starting an innovative product, do you think that having a good network would lead to more success?
Sure.
Well, yeah, and I mean, how do you get that network? Sure, but
network typically don't emerge out of the blue and in one step. And it is also not about running around and handing your business card to basically everyone you see. A network, a strong network, a network that can really help, is created best by joint experience. So if you work together on a tough project and the project turns out to be a success, this creates a bond. This is something where you also might remember after a number of years, well, this was this guy and he was cool and he was very helpful. And if 2 years later this guy approaches you with a question, you would not hesitate. And this is a very general thing. Whenever we work together, we sweat together, we succeed together. This creates bonds, and bonds is what networks consist of.
Okay, so I wanted to repeat that. I mean, sharing an experience is basically a good way to expand the people in your network. So perhaps joining different events and joining perhaps even an MBA experience would be one way to really make strong relationships. I guess it's all going back to the quality of the relationship, though, as you were saying,
Right.
and making sure that you can rely on that person in a sort of a business situation if you're looking to go develop an innovative product with somebody. So
right. And let me add something: the quality of the relationship and the quality of the people. So it is important that you have a strong network of strong people who are capable, who know something you don't, who have complementary skills and interests or backgrounds. And that's also a reason why we have these classes in the MBA generally pretty heterogeneous. So we have people from different industries, from different countries, from different educational backgrounds. Some are, I don't know, engineers, some are scientists, some are have a strong business background, some come from the legal side, industrial designers. We have people from huge public administration organizations. And so the mix is what is really helpful, to have these different perspectives and these different resources.
Okay. And I mean, it is a great idea to do an MBA. A question came up from V. Petrov. I see your guest account name. Maybe you can share with us your real name just to say hi. But you asked how many of the MBA program alumni opt for starting their business. And in our most recent alumni survey, we had 11% of the alumni mentioning that, yes, they did start a business within 3 years of graduating. So just so you know, that's the details on our most recent alumni survey. And Professor Franke, can you recall any of your students who maybe perhaps have started businesses, whether these were more device-based or technology-based? So this is a question from V. Petro.
Well, it totally varies. My experience at actually a large number of our students in the E&I program already have some sense of there's a market that is unserved, there's a technology that I know that is great, but in my company nobody likes it, or something related to that. So many actually have already some idea in the back of their minds. But what it is, it simply varies a lot. Typically, it depends on the background, the industry, and also on the educational background. So engineers, of course, have different ideas than a lawyer. So I'm afraid that there is no real pattern, except that it depends on the background of the people. And during the MBA, our students also have the chance to work on their ideas, which is a feature that I should mention, that we support the development of these ideas. And actually, in the post-module assignments and also in the master thesis, we encourage students to apply the content of the module, so the theory and the instruments, the methods, all that, the tool set, to apply it to this problem where the student is actually interested in. Because we have the experience, this is pretty motivating and also creating real benefit.
Okay, great. And I just wanted to quickly draw our attention to one of our final questions, because we are coming to an end. But in terms of the current situation, we know that the international residencies are a very important part of the MBA program, but with the current circumstances, are there any plan Bs in mind to address the fact that getting experiences of other environments perhaps can't take place immediately, but this is also important for the MBA experience? So are there currently other ideas or solutions to bridge the gap, perhaps in getting these other experiences in another form?
So first of all, we are optimistic that within the time frame of the MBA, which is 2 years from fall, we will have an improvement of the current COVID situation. And personally, I'm optimistic that we will have some kind of vaccination within the next year or so. But you never know. This is about the future, and the future is unknown. We actually don't know, and so we have implemented already a couple of things that I wouldn't say substitute, because this experience is pretty unique, but also introduce this element of application and of exchanging with very interesting practitioners into the modules. So in any case, and totally independent of the COVID situation, there will be much application. There will be top-notch practitioners being part of the modules, and there will be the opportunity to exchange with them and build the network also with these very interesting people. So from my perspective, the situation will be good for the MBA students, no matter how the COVID situation will look like. So.
Definitely, and I'd like to add to that, because once you are an MBA student, you join what is called the VU Executive Club, which is our greater network of alumni and students. And we also invite extra guest speakers from different parts of Europe, but also we had a recent lecture from New Zealand, and they're tuning in by webinar and using the medium of webinars to also transmit their intercultural experience, but also their research. Some are, of course, coming from universities. Some are combining their university research with their consulting business. And so they're really giving hands-on management tips for our greater community out there, which you can join as well once you're here, part of our network. So I'd like to actually just ask a final question to Professor Franke. If somebody is interested in getting more information on the entrepreneurial parts of the MBA and what might be their next step for doing so.
Well, I would advise contacting our wonderful program manager, Olnik. She's very capable. She's very deep in the topic as such, both content-wise and particularly also organization-wise. So this means she is able to answer all the questions. And in case that she doesn't know, well, she will ask me or other people who know. So this is obviously the best first step. And well, just try it out. She's nice.
All right, she doesn't bite. It sounds good, and it's not a big risk to get in touch. But well, we had a great hour now of hands-on entrepreneurial learnings from what an MBA class in its, let's say, mini form looks like here at the VU Executive Academy. I'd like to wrap it up and say thank you from my side. Greetings from Vienna, and I hope you got a lot out of this 1 hour lecture. Thank you.
Thank you. Hope to see you again, maybe in an even more interactive environment than we had now. Thanks.